Hello everyone and welcome back to another exciting Maya tutorial. In this segment, I want to talk about cameras. Now, what are cameras and how they look like in the viewport? Well, a camera is like any other node in Maya. It needs to be created. But before we talk about cameras, I want to show something to you that's there by default, if you will. We have the orthogonal views that we talked about, so the top, the front, and the side view. And how are those represented? How are these views actually represented in the viewport? Well, they look like this. It's actually a square with some lines coming out, and this is how actually the cameras that are orthogonal look like in Maya. Now, this is the front view, but we have also the side view, and the top view is here at the top, right? So you will encounter this more often than not, and I want you guys to know what it is and what they do represent. It might happen that sometimes in a scene they're not there, but if you go and display everything in the scene, they might appear, and you might be saying to yourself, oh, what this is? Well, actually, it's those nodes that are by default in any scene that you make. You can see them in the outliner. They're here: perspective, top, front, and side. The nodes are there. But in general, you don't really want to use the perspective node here to create your shots, because you want to have access to the perspective node in order to be able to create things and move things around while you have a camera that's created for you and that actually represents your shot. So how do you do that? Well, you go under Create, and under Cameras, I'm going to tear this menu out. You will have a couple of options. Now, I'm mainly interested in creating this camera. For some reasons, you might want to create a camera that has an aim, and a camera that has an aim and up vector. And you have a stereo camera if you're working, with a 3D workflow where you end up having your product in theaters and looking with 3D glasses. You will need to have a stereo rig. But I'm not going to talk about these. I'm just going to focus for now in creating just a regular camera node. And if I click on this small square here, I'm going to open up all of the options that are pertaining to this camera node. And all of these actually represent what a physical camera has in real life, right? It has a focal length, it has a sensor size, a film aperture size, and so on. So it's not super necessary for you to know what all of these technical assets, like for example, the shutter angle and what type of shutter angle provides in terms of a motion blur. All of these are actually changeable later on. So don't worry, just go on and create the camera node and you will be presented with the camera in the scene, right? By default, it's going to be called camera 1 and it's here. If I press F on my keyboard, I can frame on the camera's location. And if I use my move tool by pressing W on my keyboard, I can move the camera up and down on the Z-axis or on the X-axis. Now, I can also scale the camera. If I just press R on my keyboard, I have the option of scaling it. Now, I can scale it to a size that's decent for me to be able to select this camera. And I want to move it in the back here and rotate. So it's important to know if you press E on your keyboard, you will be able to rotate your camera as well. Now, once I have this set up, what do I want to do? I want to be able to see my perspective view, or my perspective node, if you will, and be able to see how the shot that I've set up looks like. In a way, what I mentioned before, I want to have the perspective view free for me to work and move things around or animate if need be. And I want my camera view to stay locked in another viewport so that I can see what's going on within my shots or within the boundaries of my shots. So what do I do in order to create this? Well, I just go and create two viewports side by side like this, and I'm going to be presented by default with a front view. Now, what I want to do is I want to select my camera, if it's not already selected, and go under panels and say look through selected. Now, what happens is that I actually now am presented with the camera. So see, if I use the movement tools in Maya, actually you can see in the viewport what's happening. It's actually reflecting my movement. So you can zoom in by using alt right click, or pan by using the middle mouse button, or orbit up and down, pan up and down by using the alt and left mouse button. Now, a couple of things that are also very important and that I use quite often are situated here under the view option and camera tools, camera settings. And I've tiered this out in order to show you guys what this is all about. There are many options here that are very important. Now, the no gate, film gate, and resolution gate, I tend to put this onto resolution gate because you want to be able to see what's going on within your final frame, or actually what's going to be rendered out. So this is why I use resolution gate. And then if you want to have safe action, safe title, if you're going to have some title animation or some movement, you don't want for old generation TVs to crop that content, so you can have these margins on or off if needed. You can see the film origin shown here, or the film pivot. If you need to know where the pivot of the camera is, that's the main pivot point of the camera. And if you want it to be horizontal, vertical fill, overscan, those are all options that allow you to actually see how your camera view is going to end up at the end of the day in your final render. Now, if it bothers you to have this mask for some reason, you have an option to remove the gate mask, or you can keep it. Generally, I like to keep it. And the idea of what I mentioned before is that now when I see my shot, and let's say I want to move something, within the boundaries of this frame, I can arrange it in the perspective view, and I would be working within the perspective view in order to arrange these elements precisely where I want them to be, right? So this would be what the camera node is and how you create it. Now, you can get technical by clicking Control A while you've selected your camera, and you can enter into the camera attributes. Now, this is where things get interesting, because if you start changing your focal length, you can see you're changing the camera's focal length, which, for example, if you were to put in real life a 24mm lens on your camera, you would have a wider angle of view, 12, even wider than that. If you're going to something that's like 65, you get a telephoto look and compression of space. But I mean, I'm not going to talk about details about what you get here by changing those, but all of the attributes linked to your camera here can be changed, and at any time you can go back to 35mm, for example. But one important thing that I want to mention before I close this is that you see, if I scale the camera visual representation that I see in the preview perspective work area, the preview of that camera, it doesn't affect the scale of my camera, right? It stays the same. It makes it more easier for me to select it within the scene. But if you really wanted to change the scale of the camera, you can change it by going into the attributes here and changing the scale of the camera. If you wanted to make the camera huge, you would say 0.1 and so on. I wouldn't change that. I would leave it at 1, but I just wanted to show you these options that are available to you here, and you can change them. But I will review that in another lesson, because this is a bit more advanced and it can get too technical. So thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe to our Kinomentor channel. I'll see you in the next video.